It was one of those crisp mornings in Atlanta when the city's heartbeat pulsed through every horn, every step, every conversation. The downtown streets gleamed with the reflection of glass towers, symbols of wealth, success, and prestige. Inside the polished marble halls of Easton National Bank, bankers in tailored suits moved like clockwork. To them, image was everything and time was money. So when an old black man with worn-out shoes, a dusty brown sack slung over his shoulder, and a quiet confidence in his step walked through those glass doors, heads turned, not in admiration, but mockery. The receptionist, a young woman barely in her 20s, gave him a polite yet dismissive smile. Others whispered and chuckled under their breath. "He must be lost," someone murmured. "Maybe he's here to cash a welfare check," another snorted. But the old man didn't flinch. His eyes, wise, calm, and steady, scanned the room. He walked straight to the front desk and said with a voice that carried quiet authority, "I'm here to speak with the manager. Tell him Mr. Samuel Jefferson would like a word." The laughter grew louder. His bank? The tellers exchanged amused looks. None of them had any idea that by the end of that day, the joke would be on them. And the man they mocked would own every inch of marble beneath their designer shoes. Samuel Jefferson was 78 years old, but time had been kind to his spirit. His hands were calloused from decades of work, his back slightly bent, but his presence carried the quiet dignity of a man who had lived through struggle and survived it all. The sack he carried wasn't just a random bag. Inside it were tattered documents, faded photographs, and yellowed letters, pieces of his life's journey. The bank manager, Richard Easton, was a man in his 40s with slick hair, polished shoes, and a superiority complex so large it barely fit behind his mahogany desk. When the receptionist nervously explained that an old man outside claimed to own the bank, Richard smirked. "Own the bank?" he repeated, laughing. "Let's have some fun. Send him in." Samuel entered, tipping his old hat respectfully. "Good morning, sir," he said. "I'm Samuel Jefferson." Richard leaned back, amused. "Your family's land?" "Mr. Jefferson, this is Easton National Bank. It's been here for 40 years. Samuel nodded, placing his sack gently on the floor. "Yes, I know. Because my grandfather sold this land right here to your father's company under unfair terms. I've come to settle what's owed." The laughter that followed was cruel, echoing through the glass-walled office. Years before Atlanta's skyline was filled with towers, the land where Easton Bank stood had been farmland. In 1954, Samuel's grandfather, Henry Jefferson, was one of the few black landowners in the area. After years of hard work and prejudice, he had built a thriving cotton business, but power and envy often go hand in hand. The Easton family, wealthy, connected, and ruthless, had always wanted the Jefferson land for expansion. When Henry refused to sell, they used influence and intimidation to force him out. Through forged documents and a legal deal, they bought the land for pennies. Henry died shortly after, heartbroken. Samuel was just a boy then, but he never forgot. His father swore to reclaim the land, but died before he could. So Samuel made it his life's mission. He had no army, no money, no lawyers back then, but he had time, determination, and knowledge. And over decades, he quietly studied property law, collected evidence, and filed claims no one believed in. Until one day, the law finally did. Back in the office, Samuel opened his sack. The manager frowned as the old man laid out documents, deeds, contracts, letters bearing signatures from the 1950s, and recent court filings. "This," Samuel said calmly, "is proof that the sale was fraudulent, and last week the court agreed." Richard blinked. "What?" Samuel slid a fresh document across the desk. The new property title. The land on which Easton Bank stood now legally belonged to Samuel Jefferson. The manager's smug grin vanished. He grabbed the papers, scanning them in disbelief. "This can't be real," he muttered. "We would have known if the property changed ownership." "You would have," Samuel said, "if you hadn't ignored the court notices for months. Seems you thought an old man's claims weren't worth reading." By now, several employees had gathered outside the glass walls, watching in confusion. The same ones who had laughed earlier were now whispering nervously. Within hours, the news spread like wildfire. Social media picked it up. The old man with the sack trended on Twitter. Local reporters arrived, eager for the story of how a 78-year-old man had just outwitted one of Atlanta's biggest banks. The Easton family rushed in trying to negotiate. "Mr. Jefferson," the patriarch said smoothly, "surely we can come to an arrangement. You don't want the hassle of managing a bank." Samuel smiled. Oh, I don't plan to manage it. I just plan to remind the world who it really belongs to. He paused, then added, and maybe make a few changes around here, starting with how you treat people who don't look like your usual clients. That line hit deep. Reporters caught it and the clip went viral. The next morning, the bank's front page read, "Old man reclaims family land from billion-dollar bank. Justice 70 years later." That night, Samuel sat on his porch looking at the stars. He could still hear his grandfather's voice, teaching him to plow, to pray, to never let bitterness win. "You don't fight hate with hate, son," Henry had once said. "You fight it with patience and truth." It took nearly a lifetime, but Samuel had done just that. He remembered the years of rejection, lawyers laughing, judges dismissing his filings, neighbors telling him to give up, but he never did. In his sack, alongside the legal papers, was his grandfather's Bible, old, worn, but intact. Inside it, a folded letter Henry had written before he died. "If one day justice comes for us, let it come through love, not revenge." Samuel whispered, "You were right, Grandpa." It came. The next week, Samuel returned to the bank, now his property. The same receptionist who had laughed earlier stood up nervously as he entered. "Good morning, sir," she said, voice trembling. He smiled warmly. "Good morning, young lady. Don't look so scared." "I didn't come to fire anyone, just to talk," she nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir, I shouldn't have." Samuel raised a hand gently. "We all learn. Sometimes the lesson costs us a little pride. The real question is, do we grow from it?" The employees listened quietly as he continued. "You all see an old man with a sack and think poverty, but this sack carried generations of struggle, faith, and perseverance. Don't ever judge someone by the weight they carry. You never know what's inside." Silence filled the hall. Even Richard Easton lowered his head. Instead of kicking the Eastons out, Samuel made a decision that stunned everyone. He offered them a deal. They could continue operating the bank under new terms, with a foundation in his grandfather's name that would fund scholarships for underprivileged youth. "Your family took from mine once," Samuel said. "Now, you'll help build futures instead." The deal made headlines again. People praised Samuel's grace, calling him a living example of forgiveness and strength. Months later, the Henry Jefferson Scholarship Fund launched, helping dozens of young students from low-income neighborhoods pursue degrees in business and law. Each year, Samuel attended the award ceremonies, wearing his same old hat and carrying that same sack. When asked why he still carried it, he smiled and said, "To remind myself where I came from and how far we've all come." 2 years later, Samuel passed peacefully in his sleep. The city mourned him as a hero. Flags were lowered, and even the governor issued a statement honoring his legacy. At his funeral, hundreds gathered, bankers, students, reporters, even strangers who had been touched by his story. His sack rested on the coffin, just as he wanted. Inside it, there were no riches, no gold, just history. The documents that once proved ownership now symbolize something greater: justice served through perseverance. The Easton Bank, now renamed Jefferson Easton Financial, continued to honor his vision. A bronze statue of Samuel standing with his sack was placed outside the bank entrance, facing the city skyline. At the base of the statue, an inscription read, "He carried a sack full of faith and walked in with truth." The world laughed until it bowed. In a world obsessed with appearances, Samuel Jefferson reminded everyone that true power often hides beneath humility. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he simply believed in justice and patience, in the power of doing what's right even when nobody's watching. He taught an entire city that respect isn't bought, it's earned, and sometimes reclaimed after generations of silence. A powerful message indeed. Greatness doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears old shoes, carries a dusty sack, and walks quietly into destiny. That's so true. Samuel's story is a powerful reminder that patience, perseverance, and justice can prevail even in the face of adversity. It's a message that resonates with all of us and one that's worth sharing.